I'd really like to extend our thanks to our speaker for this afternoon from the NTA, Finola O'Driscoll. Finola is an experienced transport planner and senior programme manager within the NTA with a background in civil engineering and urban planning. She's been responsible for green school travel initiatives and smarter travel workplace programmes to create travel culture change at organisational levels, and she continues to work on walking and cycling infrastructure projects such as the Baldoyle Greenway and Dublin City Council's school zone measures, as well as pop-up cyclotracks in South Dublin, Dunleary, Fingal and Cork. And she's going to present, I suppose, the key findings of this Bike Life survey, which is the biggest assessment of cycling in urban areas in Ireland and the UK, for us today. So I'll hand over to Finola. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carol. Thanks for that. Thanks everyone for taking time out of your lunchtime. Hopefully you're snacking away while I'm chatting. Yes, this is about the Bike Life report. So the Bike Life report was conducted in 2019, so it's pre-COVID. So we'll remember that as we're going through, but still very interesting stats. So what is Bike Life? So Dublin joined 17 cities and regions in the UK. It's run by Sustrans, who's kind of a sustainable transport charity slash, well, behemoth really in the UK. They do an awful lot, and I suppose the principle behind it is you value what you can measure. That we hadn't been doing enough research really into cycling, and we didn't know what people wanted, what their attitudes and opinions were, plus a kind of the numbers, the quantitative side of things, measuring our networks and things like that. Bike Life is inspired by the Copenhagen bicycle account, which tracks cycling progress every 3 years in that city, and it's been pretty instrumental in the development of Copenhagen to a very cycle-friendly place it is today. So yeah, it's an assessment of city cycling development. It includes infrastructure, travel behaviour, attitudes and opinions, the impact of cycling in terms of environment and economic impact and social impact, and looks at new initiatives. So yeah, so we're part of a big network now, and they're all comparable. The Bike Life reports are comparable across this network. So in terms of the data gathering, we counted basically our kilometres of cycle infrastructure. So disaggregated that between the painted lines that you'll see, tracks which are physically separated from traffic, greenways, 30 kph areas, and cycle parking. So that's all mapped now and available. Actually, on the NTA website, you'll have the address at the end. It's all there in GIS format. I suppose the main meat of the Bike Life report and study was behaviour data. So we wanted to know about the types of people owning and riding bicycles, how often, how far, and to what types of destination. And then their attitudes, and we wanted to know the attitudes and perceptions of the citizenry of Dublin towards cycling. And then with the help of input from the HSE, RSA, EPA and others, we did a big modelling and analysis on the health impacts, the economic impacts and the environmental impacts of cycling. Okay, so the main part being the resident survey. We went door to door, 1,100 residents across the Dublin Metropolitan Area. So it's not the GDA and it's not Dublin, it's the Dublin Metropolitan Area, which is sort of the built up area. But as you can see, there are some fairly rural areas still there, and it extends from Donabay to Kilcock to Greystone. So pretty much anyone who's kind of travelling within the Dublin area. We did face-to-face interviews, and with that level of participation, is a plus or minus 3% margin of error. Just to say, this wasn't just, you know, the first 1,100 people. Every electoral district the controls were put in place to make sure that interviews were demographically representative of each electoral district, and obviously then of the whole, they were demographically representative of the GDA. So this is a real sense of how, the Dublin Metropolitan Area, this is a real sense of how how citizens feel. So the key statistics arising from this, we were shocked. Even in the NTA, 24% of adults cycle once a week. That's nearly 1 in 4 of us over 16 living in the Dublin area cycle at least once a week. That's not a stat that had been collected before. The census only collects those who cycle to work and to school. Our own, the NTA household survey collects stats in a different fashion. So this is kind of about cycling participation. Like, so 1 in 4 of us cycle at least once a week. Only 14% of those are women. 11% cycle 5 days or a week or more, which is, you know, again, a big stat. So that's your commuters really, to school and education. And 21% of people don't cycle but would like to start. Those stats are kind of remain the same even when we look at women or physically disabled. I'm kind of going to highlight some of the inclusivity stats here, so you can see where the differences are. 11% being cycled 5 days a week or more, but only 5% of women do. So what were the main reasons for not cycling? Going back to this, Dublin rates pretty well in that picture of the 17 other areas. I think only Cambridge, Edinburgh and Bristol were ahead of us in terms of cycling participation. Reasons for not cycling, well, the main reason is concern about safety. And then poor weather comes in. Not confident cycling, and not for people like me, almost tally to the same amount as concerned about safety. So that's a really interesting area for us as policymakers and as practitioners. What can we do in that area? The not for people like me is particularly interesting, and you'll see when we're looking at socioeconomic factors how that plays out. Poor weather, there's a fact, you know, we are Irish. There's lots of statistics to say that there's less rain in Dublin than in Amsterdam, but perception is there, and maybe it's around destination facilities and the types of lockers or showers or sort of stuff that's at destinations. What would help people cycle more? Well, 69% of residents would find cycling on protected tracks on roads, that means physically protected from traffic, to help them cycle more. And that was the same really for women and men. And it's great to be able to show these slides. I think, this is the coastal mobility route in Dún Laoghaire. And I wouldn't have had pictures like this on my slides before a couple of months ago. So it's great to see, and you'll see there the types of people cycling. I think that's key. You can see different age groups, different genders, different types of bikes. So cycling for a lot of different purposes, maybe to school, maybe for leisure, maybe even for shopping in your cargo bike. And so that's the kind of key stat really. One of the key stats from the Bike Life report is that people really want physical protection. They want segregation. The lines on the road really isn't going to help those who aren't cyclists to start cycling. They might going to give some protection to those who are out there already doing it, but then we're not going to capture that kind of all ages, all abilities, make it really accessible to everybody in the same way that walking or the car use is for a lot of people. And 84% of residents would support building more protected on-road cycle tracks, even when this would mean less room for other road traffic. So regardless of whether they wanted to cycle or not, wherever going to cycle or not, a vast and overwhelming majority, and Dublin topped the poll across the cities in this, an overwhelming majority of residents support the building of these types of infrastructure, even when it means less room for other road traffic. Now, obviously, that's at a kind of conceptual level. We're not saying it, and I'm testament to it. Like, we're, you know, when it comes down to street level, there are a lot of other barriers to deal with, and it's not, you know, if we're talking about moving parking from your particular street, there's other issues. But at least, and it doesn't undermine the fact that at least at a general level, people are very supportive of this. So inclusivity, there is a gender and age imbalance in cycling participation in Dublin, and you'd know that if you're you're seeing it, and that would be probably across the board in Ireland. We only did Bike Life for the Dublin Metropolitan Area. There is a plan to extend it to the other cities in the coming years. So 14% of women cycle at least once a week, where that's 35% of men. And you can see in the age profile that it really tapers off towards as people get older. So 40% of it, this is quite an encouraging statistic really, 40% of people aged between 16 and 25 cycle at least once a week, and that really tapers down to 6% of people over 66. And you might think, well, yeah, I mean, cycling is an active mode, of course that would be the case, but that's not, there's no kind of inherent biological reason why people would not cycle, because when we look at the Netherlands, 55% of all trips are by women, and people over 65 make as many trips, actually higher a percentage of trips, a quarter of their trips by bike, higher than any other age group over the age of 26. So there are, once it's cycling infrastructure is there, that can be, as in the Netherlands in Copenhagen, it really does become a kind of spread the inclusivity and becomes egalitarian activity. So more than half of women claim they do not cycle and do not want to, compared to just over a third of men. That's probably the biggest gender. There's a lot of statistics in bike life, and you can peruse them at your leisure, but that's probably the biggest gender difference that we found. Of those who do not want to cycle, don't cycle and do not want to, the majority are women. And safety is the main reason. They rate safety as much lower than men. The current environment, 39% of women would rate cycle safety in their local area as good, compared to 56% of men, and 29% of women would rate children's cycle safety in their local area, compared to 45% of men. And it might be a bit of a reach here, but I'm guessing the mum is very involved as a mum in the kind of travel decisions of children, and whether, you know, where and when you're going to allow a child to cycle to school, either accompanied or unaccompanied. This is 19% of residents do not have a car available in their household. I think a lot of our discourse around travel, we forget this. You know, it's often maybe put, it's car versus bike or road space, or it's car versus pedestrian, and we kind of forget about the cohort that are totally car non-available, that have no options, and it is significant. And in places in the city and in places in certain suburbs, that would go up to nearly 50% or above. And that tallies with this 19% tally as well with the census. Interestingly, these residents are also the least likely to cycle or to want to cycle. They're where the not for people like me comes in. That's a big differential in the socioeconomic D and E groups. So that we start to see that there's kind of an inverse, maybe a status thing with cycling happening, that people think it's very accepted maybe amongst the middle class, whereas lower socioeconomic groups, it's less of a prevalent activity. And so, yeah, we should see that being a cyclist can be associated with a certain type of person and characteristics. What can be accessed in 25 minutes? I think this is an interesting map, because, you know, we often hear, well, Dublin is a very sprawling city, you know, really can the bike impact on, given our history of sprawl, our legacy, what can the bike really do? So taking a 6 kilometre range, and that would be a comfortable enough cycle. You could probably do that within 25 minutes, 30 minutes. A lot of the city is accessible, and e-bikes, of course, can extend the range. The economic benefits are really, really big. A big part of bike life was working with Sustrans and their team of statisticians, and there is a team, so I'm very jealous of their of their ability, you know, their resources, and they had quite a complex model taken from the Copenhagen, built on similar grounds to the Copenhagen model, in terms of real quantifying the economic benefits. And it's all there again on their website. You can look into the detail. It's great when I'm talking to Engineers Ireland, because I know there are people that will do this. For every kilometre cycled instead of driven, society benefits to the tune of €1. So in total, this adds up to about 170 million for those who are cycling at the moment in Dublin. sorry, 170 million a year for those who are cycling in Dublin who had a car available and could have chosen the car. But when we think that the average Irish person travels about 17,000 kilometers a year, you can really start to rack up some mega benefits for society based on change in motor travel, especially when we think about the percentage of trips. I think, yeah, I know that there's 30% of trips. This came out in the 2019 CSO travel survey, that 30% of trips are under 2 kilometers. And a huge portion of those are done by car, by the way. So in terms of economic benefits, this is in the report as well. Transport is the only sector where emissions is growing. 20% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from transport. Yeah, and we really need to work on reducing those. So just to kind of give it a sort of a, what do you call it, like a mental hook, an image of how we're doing in terms of greenhouse gas saved by those who did choose to cycle in that Dublin area in 2019. It was equivalent to 400,000 people flying from Dublin to London. And health benefits. We're all so familiar with the term epidemiology. We all kind of have a junior degree in it now. Yeah, there's huge epidemiological benefits from active travel. Interestingly enough, I didn't realize when they were doing the stats, and we got a lot of information from the HSE, the prevention, so active travel like cycling prevents long-term health conditions. Number one prevention is depression, which is great. And I suppose people would know, that's probably the first thing most GPs prescribe is exercise, pretty much across the board for any type of chronic condition. Depression, dementia, coronary heart disease. Those who are cycling in Dublin are saving the HSE equivalent of 83,000 GP appointments per year. And obviously active travel improves air quality. And according to the EPA, we're already in Ireland losing about 1,100 of our citizens to early adult deaths due to air pollution. And a big one for well, just I think for society in general, thinking about, it's 1 in 5 or 1 in 4, depending on where you get your sources, children are obese without and they're not meeting their daily exercise targets of 60 minutes a day for kids. It's 30 for adults, but it's 60 for kids, which can be, I guess we know about sedentary lifestyles and technology. Active commute, an active trip to school is ideally placed to go towards meeting a lot of that target, and trying to save children from the kind of societies that we've built up around them, really, that might lead to obesity and ongoing health problems. And we asked residents what they would like the government to spend more on, what different types of transport. And again, we came up top really in Dublin across the cities, in that we were the city that wanted the least amount of spend on driving, or only 34% of people wanted more spend on driving, whereas 75% wanted more spend on cycling, 71% more spend on public transport, and 61% on walking. So there's a big desire there amongst the citizens for greater investment in cycling, public transport and walking, which is great. And again, this sort of stat wouldn't have been gathered before. People particularly wanted increased space for socialising, walking and cycling on their main streets. They wanted reduced speed limits on local roads. They were interested, 70% of them were supportive of restricting through traffic on residential streets. 58% would support closing streets outside schools at peak times. So that's a fairly strong intervention. And there was a 60% support for that. And yet at the same time, 64% of the residents would support more car parking along the local main street. So we're not saying, like, there is a bit of cognitive dissonance there. There was a kind of support for everything maybe, without maybe realising the trade-offs. How can you get protected cycle infrastructure and still have car parking along the main street? So maybe off street can be done. Which leads me to say, if we have this such a strong mandate as evidenced by this survey, how come it's so hard to get out there and do these schemes? Where are the schemes taking so long? And as we've seen, maybe Bus Connects and some other any scheme I'm involved in, there's a big resistance to change, really. So what is it? Why is that? If the mandate is there at a general level, how come it's hard to implement at the street level? Well, the reason is change is hard. Walking and cycling projects are, more than anything, really, they're change management projects. We're changing the streets, and at the streets where we live and in our towns, we're changing them quite significantly, and we're changing priority, rebalancing priority away from what it's been traditionally very prioritized towards cars to towards people, and that's change, and somebody's going to get impacted, even if it's in their longer term benefit. It's an impact, and it is extremely, it's hard to sell. I think, in terms of psychology, familiarity would be a big, even we kind of stick with what we're familiar with, even if it's not serving us. So you need a few psychological tools, I guess, and in terms of, in the parlance of economic behavior economics, they'd be called nudges, based on that seminal book Nudge, which, if you haven't read, I definitely recommend. It's really, really good. It's kind of how you get people to do what you want. So it could be very useful in your home life, never mind your professional life. But so many nudges are needed to change travel culture, and Bike Life is just one tool, giving a wider societal view than is heard on many individual projects. So when we published Bike Life, it featured in an Irish Times editorial, which said, the tipping point has come for cycling and walking infrastructure, and it cited that 84% of people being supportive of protected cycle infrastructure, even at the expense of other traffic. But many nudges are needed to change travel culture, such as trials and temporary infrastructure, which we're probably seeing quite a bit of. There's lovely Black Rock at the moment, which was done very quickly. And the reason that trials and temporary infrastructure are very important, I think, is that they kind of undermine that fear of change. If you present people with what they know versus what they don't know, and you're presenting maybe some pictures, or, as engineers, we're very used to looking at plans, but I've met lots of people, including architects, that have looked at even our kind of well-developed and nice brochurized Bus Connects plans, and still can't really read what's going on, even though there might be 3D images are great, but they can't really read the plans. So we could go full scale for 3D imagery, but there's nothing like getting out onto the street and feeling it and thinking, right, okay, there are some pros and cons to this, but I like this, or I don't, or I like where we're going here, and if we had a bit more greenery, or okay, car parking spaces have been removed and it's a bit harder to park, but I can sit out, I can meet more people along the way, I might even get the bike out of the shed and give it a go to come down to Black Rock, as is happening in Black Rock. Like, they've never been busier, the businesses there. Quality communication. So just in terms of getting good infographics out, getting good information out to people. People just don't read reports anymore. At the time of if it ever was useful, the time of having a 70-page options report and a few drawings up in the local library is just over, and nobody's going to do it, and they don't want it. They want a 12-page brochure at max with infographics and then loads of 3D imagery, and if you've got a video, and I think a lot of our park dates are going towards having videos instead of CGI videos, really, instead of drawings. That all matters, because that's just what's expected, and you're not going to get the support without that. People won't feel like they've been communicated with. Early community engagement, adding streetscape elements to our designs. So as you can see in Black Rock, there was quite a lot of planting, and just, it's fairly cheap stuff in the overall scheme of things, but it can make a big difference, and people feel if they've had some input in terms of streetscape, or where the trees goes, or where the planters go, they feel engaged a bit more, and maybe there's a local business kind of sponsoring one of these planters or something, and there's just a bit more engagement. And school-based initiatives, I think for too long we kind of ignored schools as a major as a major trip attractor. And they are great places. It's hard to get into, it's hard to engage with school communities, but once you've got, and the NTA supports the Green Schools program, so a lot of our projects would be using them to kind of engage with school communities. And we get amazing stuff back from schools. So particularly from the, when I say school communities, I do mean the teachers, the parents, the pupils, and the principal. So, but from the pupils, there's a big desire for change. Like I've seen kind of sketch drawings come from secondary school students that I'd give them a job, but they were so good, like with curb protected cycle lanes, and we need to sort this roundabout out, and there's no crossings here, because usually they're on foot or they're on a bike, and they're aware of what the issues are. So yeah, so I think schools are a great place to get that kind of moral mandate in a way, or just some public mandate for change. So if we build these type of infrastructure, and people said they would come, that's what would help them. Would it? If we built protected infrastructure, would it increase cycling? And yes, in Willsbrook Road and Lucan, did a lot of work with protected cycle infrastructure and sorting out junctions, and there was a big increase in cycling and an even bigger increase in pedestrians because they could cross the road now. It's the same in Tallaght to Temple Oak. And then because you kind of get sick of citing Copenhagen and the Netherlands as a transport planner engaged in cycling projects. So just might be interesting to know, Seville grew their bike network from 12 kilometers of protected bike lanes in 2006 to 150 kilometers in 2013. Now they'd lovely wide roads and they could do it pretty easy, but cycling grew 435%. And just to let you know, whenever we go into schools through the Green Schools program, the number, like overwhelmingly, children want to cycle. And when I say children, it includes secondary school pupils. So I'd say pupils want to cycle. That is their preferred mode of travel. Even for those who walk, they'd much prefer to cycle. And this survey shows it's over like 10,000 students were asked. This is collated over the years of Green Schools, and the preferred mode of cycling or the preferred mode of travel to school is cycling. There's something, I suppose, about the freedom and maybe the element of fun with it that comes. So there is a huge latent demand to cycle to school. If we could put in the type of infrastructure that would allow that to be released. Is the money there? Well, yes. The programme for government seeks a fundamental change in the nature of transport in Ireland. There's a target spend of 360 million a year. That's 1.8 billion over 5 years to enable a step change in the number of people taking journeys by foot and bicycle. I assume that pun was intended, which will improve the quality of life and air quality. So there's a huge political commitment matched by a financial commitment behind it, and across Europe. I mean, I think whenever there's any noises from the central, from the banks or the monetary funds or whatever, it's about kind of that any stimulus package following this period of crisis will very much focus on green recovery, and walking and cycling projects are ideally placed for that. They're local, they generate jobs, and they're green. So yeah. So what's going to happen in the future to kind of meet this latent demand that's been expressed by people in Dublin? Well, there's lots of temporary pop-up infrastructure. You're seeing there's the Liffey Cycleway. Just recently they put planters in, and I think it just looks lovely. There's big ticket infrastructure projects that are currently away, funded by the NTA, the Dodder, the Royal Canal, the Coastal Way, and the Dublin City part that might match in with the Dunleary part. There's 200 kilometres, approximately 200 kilometres of cycle tracks, that's protected cycle tracks proposed under Bus Connects. And the NTA are working with the local authorities at the moment. That's what my life's been taken up with, really, on a 5-year plan for each of the metropolitan local authorities to match the programme for government ambition. So a 5-year plan detailing how that 1.8 billion will be spent. In general, yeah, there's 30% of trips are under 2K, as I said, and many of them are by car, especially to school. 21% of Dubliners don't cycle but would like to, and 54% feel they should cycle more. And a huge survey by Cycling Ireland last year not last year, last May. Where they do one every year, and obviously we were in the middle of the pandemic in May, but they found that cycling participation had doubled, and this was like 5,000 people survey in Ireland, which just is quite amazing, and maybe tallies with some of your experiences where you've been back out on the bike, or family members have been back out on the bike, and yeah, you might have been commuting to work, but you've been back out on the bike and feeling like, okay, this you may be enjoying it, maybe thinking that you could cycle more to local shops or things like that. Yeah, that's your 25%, less than 2k, which is a huge portion. To if we're at about 4% cycle nationally, and about 11% cycle to, or 11% walk and 4% cycle to work or college. So there's a big portion there that could be a big potential target group there. Oh yeah, and although I despise anecdotal stories in order to kind of used as evidence, I don't. We've been told, human nature would be that you need a story really to bring things to life, and I've given a lot of stats there. So here's a picture of my mum, who just got a bike 2 months ago. She's 73. She's not exactly an early adopter or particularly green, or even would rate herself as healthy. She's a smoker who loves her car, who thinks, I'm a bit airy-fairy in the job that I do. But she was kind of sick of walking around the same streets in Walkinstown during the pandemic, and she thought maybe I wouldn't mind a bike. So we clubbed together and got her a bike, and she's been delighted and out on it every day and doing trips to mass or trips to the church. And do you see her basket there? She's been filling that with milk and bread and popping to the shops maybe 4 times a day, just as something to do. And I'm only using her as an illustration of the kind of change that can happen. And as the Bike Life survey has shown, that there's kind of big latent demand amongst Dubliners to have a very cycle-friendly city, that cycle culture is something that people want. The full report and all cross tabulations and all mappings and the reports on the socioeconomic model and all of that great interesting stuff. And I know I'm talking to engineers, so I'm not I'm not even tongue-in-cheek saying that. It is really interesting stuff. That's all there on the National Transport website. Yes, and Bike Life will be repeated again for 2021 and every 2 years hence, so that we have a good kind of just a monitoring tool to see how we're doing in achieving those desires of Dubliners for a cycle-friendly city. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks.